Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Conversation of Our Generation, where we are solving the problems of today with the wisdom of the past. And today I will be having on for another time, again, the Vital Masculinity Podcast guys. Stephen and Brian will be joining me to talk a lot about really how can individuals take up the yoke and just say, I'm going to be the man or the woman that I'm supposed to be. I'm going to do the right thing regardless, and start from there and build a culture that has people who are in mass doing the right thing, and create a movement that way, kind of a grassroots movement of people just taking ownership and saying, I'm not going to use the excuse of, whatever the culture is doing. I'm going to just choose the right thing. And so we talk a lot about that and go off on all sorts of great tangents, talk a lot about some of what they've been discussing with their episodes and their series on friendship and on the four loves, which definitely you should go and check out as well, because it's very interesting. Lots of good conversations happening there and great tips, especially for guys who maybe deprioritize their friendships a little bit and sort of just get to, I don't know, get around to it when they do, I guess I should say. And that, I think, is really not a great way to go about it. And they are helping guys figure out how to do friendships the right way and discussing the four loves. I think they're on Eros right now, if I'm not mistaken, at the time this is coming out. So definitely head over to the Vital Masculinity Podcast. Check them out. The links will be in the show notes to whatever they've got going on with their podcast, their website, Twitter, all of that. And as far as the Conversation of Our Generation, you can find out more by subscribing, keeping up with what's going on here. Just 5-star review and a good rating, and sharing this with your friends. It helps spread and get more people involved in the dialogue, which helps us get more perspectives and bring in more great insights. So definitely share this around and with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Check it out on YouTube. You can watch the interview there. So definitely check that out as well. And you can go to conversationofourgeneration.com to find out everything else that I have going on. So definitely do that. And I'm also rolling out a Discord server, so we can maybe have some more in-depth conversations. So be on the lookout for some more announcements about that. And I'll be definitely letting you know as that gets rolled out a little bit more fully. I got it a little bit set up, but I want to finish a couple tweaks and things like that to it. So definitely be on the lookout for that. And if you're interested in learning more about property rights and how they translate to our new digital age that is coming, you can buy my book, Property Rights in the Digital Age, at Amazon. And so with that, let's hop over to the interview. Well, thanks, Brian and Stephen, for joining me again for a conversation here at the Conversation of Our Generation. I'm really glad to have you guys on again.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a great conversation.
For sure. And for people who may not know what's going on at the Vital Masculinity Podcast, what have you guys been up to and talking about recently? I've been listening, but for those of my listeners who haven't tuned in, what's been going on there?
You want to tackle that, Brian, while my bourbon flushes through the system?
We've been going through the different virtues. We basically started off our podcast covering the 4 cardinal virtues, as well as some different topics mixed in there. But now we're kind of working our way into the theological virtues by way of C.S. Lewis's 4 Loves. And once we get done with that, we'll get more into the theological aspects of that. But right now we've been doing some episodes on, we just did a bunch of episodes on friendship, which I think were really great. I'm definitely going to go back and listen to those again, because I know, especially being locked up at home and a lot of people working from home, having good friends is important. And right now we're also working on some episodes related to Eros, like romantic love.
Mm-hmm.
Nailed it.
Nice. I liked it. I really like the series on friendship. I think that, I was just thinking of like when you were giving examples, I'm like, oh, yep, I have a friend like that. I have these, I've been in that situation. Yeah, it's definitely, I think, a tough one. I know, especially, this past year, it's been hard to build those bonds. Like I saw a friend last week that is one of my best friends that I hadn't seen in a month because, over Christmas, people were being cautious seeing family or just busy. And when you're busy and then you're also quarantining, it's just tough to actually see people in person. and also we're
Absolutely.
both bad at texting.
I find it
plans.
funny, you mentioned you saw a good friend of yours, one of your best friends, you hadn't seen in a month. And I feel like a lot of guys that both listen to our podcast as well as that listen to your show are probably like, a month, man, I've not seen my best friend in like, 3 years. And that, we talk about a lot of the stuff that gets to the heart of that problem. And I think it's just this modern, in many ways you could say just a modern malaise. There's a lot of acedia going on with a lot of men, and a lot of them don't really take the initiative to do things like reach out to their friends, which is really a shame, especially as we deal with COVID and the responses to the lockdowns and such.
Yeah.
I've been telling Steven that I need to write an article for our website about social distancing, because we've been suffering from social distancing since way before the pandemic. People, I remember my mom telling me about her growing up, and like kids would be running around the neighborhood and like everyone that lives next to you. And these days, at least where I've lived, you barely know your neighbors. You don't see anyone. Everyone's inside all the time. They're always on the computer. It's I think we've been suffering from social distancing for more than what is it, coming up on a year now with COVID. We've been social distancing for a lot longer than that.
Yeah.
I agree. I was listening to a podcast recently, and he says basically, if you don't know your neighbors, then you're wrong, just plain and simple. And I think that's great. Like, I didn't make a very good effort, honestly, when I moved here to reach out to the neighbors, but still found a way to like meet the 3 people that I live next to, or 4 people. I guess there's really like 8 adjacent, but like that I can kind of consider neighbors. But still, like, we say hi, we have at least a bit of friendliness, but like I don't have their phone number. If something happened at my house while I was out of town, I don't know if I have them as like a resource to be like, hey, can you check on this?
Right.
I know that if something ever happened, my neighbor across the street has cameras, so we can something happens there, I can see it. But it's different than my parents, where I grew up. Everybody just like knew everybody, even if you didn't really know them very well. It's like, oh, that's so and so, that's that car that goes to that house over there.
Right.
And we grew up playing capture the flag with like our street and across the neighborhood, and it didn't matter. So it's very weird to see that like move out of that, because I feel like a lot of people didn't have that growing up, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that ties a lot into the current political climate. If you don't know your neighbors, if you don't get along with them, if they're just some crazy people that hide in their house and you hide in your house, how are we going to have a conversation with people and have a civil society?
That's what preppers are for, man.
Exactly.
Large families, bunkers underground. That's the way to live. I'm totally kidding. Don't quote me on that.
I mean, you're not far off as far as I'm concerned.
Hey, my wife and I are reading a prepper book together, just in case.
Nice. You should check out the Survival Podcast then. It's a good one. If you like
Will do.
homeschooling and you like, backyard gardening and stuff like that, it's pretty good. And he's not
all of that sounds wonderful.
Not prepping for the zombie apocalypse. It's prepping for, losing your job first and zombie apocalypse last, because you still want to have the cool guns.
Hey, both still important.
Yeah.
Or EMPs.
Yeah. Exactly. And one of the main things that I want to talk about, and I kind of think we started to touch on it there with that sense of community that we've lost, is and I acknowledge that I have not been the best neighbor in that, but how do we start to move back to some of those good things that we know are good and right, like knowing your neighbors, having a good sense of community with your church, with men's groups, if you need that kind of thing? How do we go back to building those sorts of things? You guys talk a lot about building your band of brothers, and I think that that's something that's tough, because I know for me, I would say all my closest friends are people I went to high school with or grade school with, and I think they're all great guys and they're all great people, and then the rest of my friends are probably my wife's friends. So like that's who my group is. But how do we go about finding those people who are like of like mind, of like interests?
I think the biggest thing is, first of all, you need to put yourself in the situation where you will be able to find men like that. Depending on what you're looking for, I mean, it is one of the benefits of the internet age and the social media age that you can find people of really almost any niche. I mean, going back to the prepper joke, you could find a group of preppers that you could learn from. You could find a group of preppers you can meet up with, or on a less extreme note, if you like bowling or if you go to, say, a certain church, God willing, especially in the latter example, there will be at the very least like-minded men. Now, one of the examples or one of the analogies that we draw between friendship is with dating. And I think it may throw a lot of guys off, but I don't think it should. I'm not saying you need to have romantic feelings with your friends. Obviously, that's the whole point of C.S. Lewis and, breaking up those two loves between philia and eros, obviously. But a lot of guys, kind of what I mentioned before, they don't take the initiative in anything. And it's kind of like if you're a young man, which a lot of our audience, I would reckon your audience is as well, and you see a cute girl at a coffee shop, don't just sit there and daydream about, going out with her, or don't just sit there and wait for her to come up to you or things like that. You need to take the initiative. And I really wish there was a simple solution to that. And really, it's just kind of do it. I mean, it's kind of like the same thing with cold showers. You can't really talk yourself into doing something that is difficult, doing something that may kind of be scary. You just need to do it. And it's really the same thing with friendships. I think the church group is a great example. Men's group at churches are really one of the last ways that I would reckon a lot of our audience will be able to find a solid community, a solid brotherhood that is outside of, their wife's friends. And if there is none, I think a lot of guys may get initially turned off, but you almost need to kind of have that Caesar energy. You need to have that like king energy where if something is not there, you go and create it, because we are historically a civilization of creators and of doers. And it's not that you're going to get remembered or you're going to go down in history books or people, in the future will read about you that because you made a church group, but doing something that is worthwhile, no matter how big or small, is always worthwhile. So you need to have the courage to do it, and practicing in little ways is, like just going ahead and going up to somebody and be like, hey, let's get 4 guys together and read the Bible, or go for beers and, pray together or something like that. Those are how great things can start. It doesn't need to be big, but if you don't do it, you're really not going to get anywhere.
Stephen, I think you read my mind, because that's exactly what I was going to say as well. I mean, if you're trying to, so say that we're talking about trying to make the political climate more civil. Well, I think you need to start with that is being more intentional about being friendly with the people that are around you. And that starts with your family. It starts with the people you already know, the friends you already have. And then, if you're intentional with those people, you're going to build good relationships with them. And then from there, you can start to be friendly. Well, I mean, you can do this at the same time, but be friendly with people that you see. Be friend with people at the grocery store, people you see on the street. Take an interest in their life. Don't just maybe you have to be that nosy neighbor that's interested in what's going on, because some people might be put out by that, but that's going to be the only way that you're going to be able to get to know people that you live by, and people that are in your community. And I think that once people see that you're actually genuinely interested in them and not just concerned about yourself, I think that they'll be open to being friendly with you. And I think that, like you were saying, these small little acts, it's not we can't just change everything all at once. We have to do what we can with the opportunities that we have. So look at each opportunity that you have every day to be friendly to someone, whether it be a stranger or your neighbor or even just your own family members, and start with that. And I think as you build up that muscle, that become more comfortable with doing that, I think that that's going to be contagious, and that will spread to other people as well.
Yeah, I like that point. I actually just had to go to Lowe's this past weekend, and the cashier lady was asking me questions. She's like, "Oh, what are you buying this for?" And I'm like, that's such a great way to just, and I was like, oh, well, we're painting our cabinets in our kitchen and going to be redoing the rest of it. But that, and started to talk to her a little bit about that. And it's kind of nice. I mean, right now, because of COVID, everyone else just looks like a giant coronavirus. It's like to everybody else, it feels like, I feel like when you're walking around, you just like see in people's minds that you're just like shape shifting from like a person to a giant coronavirus in their mind. But I think that hopefully we can get to a point where you're able to be neighborly again. I know for me, one thing that is tough when you guys talk about like that building the band of brothers idea is getting to a real level of conversation with your friends. I find that guys have a very strong skills set of just avoiding deep topics or avoid and especially my friends who are pretty much all lukewarm or fallen away Catholics and Christians, and still probably on the conservative libertarian side of things for the most part. But even the ones who aren't, I think I can engage with them politically, but it's like, I don't know, it's hard to talk to them about some of the more important things. I feel like it's not like you can just be like over beers talking about reminiscing about high school things. So anyways, what do you think of divinization? And just like dive into deep theology. It doesn't really work that way.
Right. That's tough. That's a very good question. And I know Stephen Mansfield in his book, Building a Band of Brothers, which I guess in many ways he trademarked that phrase. He kind of talks about that. And that really does, I think, relate to my dating analogy earlier, where I think a lot of guys that may be very gung-ho about getting a relationship with a woman will, you're not going to go out there. And if you want to actually have a relationship, you're not going to say on your first date, start talking about how many kids you want to have together or where you want to live together, things like that. That's a great way to ruin a relationship. So obviously with everything.
I was going to say, Ben Shapiro talks about how he did that. So I don't know.
Ben Shapiro.
But I think you have to be a special kind.
You got to put him through the gauntlet.
Right, Ben Shapiro is a special man. Yeah. That's another conversation. Anyway, but like you wouldn't do that with a friend too, because honestly, there's a right time and right place for everything, and it does take some prudence and to realize that sometimes those conversations just they don't like you don't line up with where the other person is at to have that conversation. Maybe they're dealing with something. Maybe they've had a long day at work and they're tired. There's a lot of things that can go into it, obviously, which is, I think, the first thing. And I think the second thing is you really need to, kind of warm people up to that. You need to kind of make them see how it may relate to them. People, and this kind of gets into like a Dale Carnegie sort of thing, where you need to kind of see like, or make it so that people know what's in it for them. And I always hate to view things like that because it views relationship in almost economic terms, and that feels really cheap and like cheating to me. But at the end of the day, I think it's still important to realize that a lot of people really do, they like talking about themselves. So if you want to talk about, say, Biden's tax plan, maybe it's better to start off with than asking a question like, oh, what do you think about Biden's tax plan? Or what do you think about his tax plan versus Trump's plan or whatever? Maybe it's better asking like, you getting ready for taxes this year, and how do you think you're going to be affected and things like that. And those little introductions, I think, are a great way to kind of break into the bigger topics, because I think a lot of people, especially if a conversation gets naturally flowing, they're going to kind of riff on anything, and it's a lot easier to kind of steer the conversation to maybe a deeper conversation you may have. Obviously, taxes are not the bigger things like, I don't know, when was the last time God spoke to you, or things like that, questions like that. But I'm a CPA, so at the very least, taxes are deep to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to talk taxes with you.
I don't want to talk taxes with anybody outside of work too. So you're fine there, man.
Unless I have a tax question, which you probably don't want to talk about anyways.
Yeah. I got really gung-ho when you and I were talking about incorporating vital masculinity. So I decided to let that die down a little bit before bringing that back up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But yeah, I think that you make a good point that from my perspective, you kind of have to talk about tangential issues before you dive right in. If I can dive right into a philosophical conversation with someone, then that's pretty rare, and that's person's probably going to be like my best friend. But in most cases, that doesn't work out. So, like, maybe you talk about, I don't know, for example, someone says, "Hey, I noticed that you don't do a lot of work on Sunday. Why is that?" Well, well, that's because I'm a Christian and it's a day of rest. Things that are not like, what do you think about the existence of God? Like it's just like it's things that people can relate to. That is, it's related to those fundamental philosophical principles, but it's more. It's not as intense or is overwhelming potentially. So I think that that's a good approach to take, is to find a way that you can relate these things to what they are experiencing. So I think of, for example, my brother-in-law, he was talking to someone about Biden getting into office, and he was talking specifically about like the Keystone Pipeline workers losing their jobs. And okay, well, that's not talking about Biden's tax plan. It's not really talking about Biden at all. It's just talking about how it's affecting these people. And so maybe that is something that is more approachable of a discussion point than like, let's talk about these specific points of law that we want to discuss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that making it relevant to someone's experience is huge. I think bringing up Dale Carnegie is great. How to Win Friends and Influence People is just, I think, a great way to just to learn how people react to things. And even starting off on kind of the surface level friendships, you can always kind of dive deeper. It's not like dating where, in the sense that it is in some ways, but dating, obviously, you're kind of, this is the one person that you have to focus on and see if that's going to work out for life. Like, you're looking for that sort of monogamous lifelong relationship. Whereas and you kind of have a time bound on that. Whereas friendships, it's like you can always have a moment where you and a friend realize something, like that you have this deeper connection on you can kind of dive deeper with someone than you can with other people. And uh, friendship can kind of grow in depth, just like you can grow in love with your wife more and more throughout time. It just sort of, I don't know. I've definitely had that with different friends where you just kind of have a moment and you're like, oh, wow, we had a really great, deep conversation. And now I feel like I can talk to you about things that, like, I may not bring up a struggle that I'm having with someone else. I would bring it up with this person instead because I've had those sorts of conversations in the past.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point about the relationship between romantic relationships and friendships, because it is kind of the beauty of, as Aristotle would say, virtuous friendships, or the way that I think C.S. Lewis actually means philia, that unlike romance, which is almost an on or off switch, it's not exactly an on or off switch, but compared to friendship, that's more the slider on the light, where you can be friends with somebody and it can go from, the Aristotelian friendship of pleasure, which, as we talked about on our show, would be kind of like the drinking buddies. You meet up with someone once a week, you chew the cud, you just talk about kind of trivial things, but you can slowly turn the slider up on that. And it doesn't need to be intentional either. It can just kind of be happenstance, where you do fall into these conversations where you're like, wow, we have this kind of deeper philosophical union in a sense. And you keep turning things up, and that makes friendship, I think, one of the truly beautiful things, is that it doesn't necessarily demand as much as a romantic relationship, which makes it easier, obviously, to have more friends. And I think you can almost say that's genetic, but it is one of the things where you can have multiple friends that are at different scales on the slider, and it doesn't necessarily impact you because there's no level of jealousy. There's no level of like, there can be interconnectedness. They can be totally separate relationships. And that really allows you to, still, I think, kind of derive utility and derive pleasure from these virtuous relationships.
That's part of the beauty of friendship and just getting to know anyone in general. And something that we maybe need to keep in mind is that people don't want to talk about things if they don't know if they can trust you. They're not going to talk about their deepest held beliefs and desires and fears if they don't know they can trust you. So you got to kind of build that trust by talking about they see you talking about things that maybe aren't as philosophically deep, but as you get to know that person, as they get, as you get to see, how you work together, how you relate to one another, I think that you start to build up that trust, that comfort with one another, then you can kind of get into these deeper discussions. And I think that's part of the problem with a lot of relationships today, especially in the public square, is that people are just very impatient. They just want to get into it, and it doesn't really work that way because like I'm not going to go out there and tell people everything I think about everything, because I don't know what they're going to do. Are they going to call my job and like try to get me fired? Are they going to, you know, take out a gun and shoot me? Like, I don't know what's going to happen. So I want to talk about, I think these things are important to talk about, and I'd like to talk about them with other people, but I need to have some sort of trust with them. And I think that, that's mutual. They're looking for from trust for me. And I think that that's perhaps part of the problem with our civil discourse today, is that there's a very low trust level among, amongst even strangers or even friend groups. I kind of wonder if my cousins, like, if they start the gulag, are they going to send, rat me out? Like, that actually, that's part of, there's this great quote. I'll have to see if I can post it later on our Twitter, but it's Theodore Dalrymple. He talks about how living in a communist society, a society that's like very PC, is you're afraid to say things that you actually believe out loud, because you're not sure who's watching, like who's going to say something, who's going to turn you in, where's the PC police, what are they going to do about it? And if we can't talk to other people openly about what we actually believe without walking on eggshells, then that doesn't bode very well for our public and civic discourse.
I would actually go as far as to say that it's not even a low trust environment that we have a lot of this discourse in. It's unfortunately, and a large part of this is played by social media. It's an openly hostile discourse,
Yeah.
and I think that is honestly the result of democracy in a internet age. I think this is the end game of an internet democracy. And yeah, I know, before people start saying we're a republic, we still vote. At the end of the day, we still vote, and that has impact, and that is going to be affected by this discourse. And I think it's very telling. I personally, and I'll get controversial here. Personally, I don't believe democracy is the best system of government. I don't believe republicanism is the best system of government. That's another conversation. But I do think that everyone from Jules Verne, the great science fiction writer, in his Around the World in 80 Days, which is a great book, to people like Hans Hermann Hoppe, the great kind of libertarian Austrian economics thinker, kind of talk about how the reason democracy succeeded in the past and the reason voting succeeded is because, or I should say this, the reason they succeeded and they created a much more peaceful society in many ways is because they took the martial tendencies that are kind of innate in humans, and whether you agree with that or not, I think you could say that man has always tried to kill other man. They took it and they directed it inward on a scale that was purely at the ballot box and not at the ammo box. And I think that's great. Obviously, if we can avoid wars, I'm all for that. But as we've seen, especially in the past 4 months, and you could say a lot of it is amplified by social media, a lot of it is amplified by people and false information or whatever. And that is definitely partially true. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether information is true or false. It matters the effect that this information has on people. If it is false, it definitely hurts more than if it is true. But I think we have a society now where, because of social media and because of the way that kind of works with us, we take these kind of martial tendencies, the Republican versus Democrat, the blues versus green, to get back to the Byzantine Empire and the Greeks, these kind of innate tendencies for conflict and team orientedness. And it's become a lot easier to not only attack your enemy, but to score points for it. And that's where it becomes very dangerous. The whole idea of virtue signaling on both sides. A lot of people on the right will say that the left is the people that virtue signal. I've read the Daily Wire. They virtue signal just as much, if not more in some respects. And I think that's the issue where, in an ideal society, we would all do our part to take the level of discourse down a notch in terms of the rhetoric. We would make sure that we could interact with people as people. We could agree to disagree, which I think is a part of manliness, really just a part of humanity that is sorely lacking these days. The ability to agree to disagree. And we could take a step back and we could all realize that if we do our part, it works better as a society or as a community, whether it's small scale or large scale. I think the issue, though, is tragedy of the commons.
Mm-hmm. I think, too, a big problem is everyone's looking for notoriety because and I find myself like this, it's like you have a great tweet, it goes viral, and you're like, oh man, people are actually paying attention to what I'm doing. And that felt really good to see that happen. And then instead of doing 150 years ago, there were a few people who could become famous. And that's just because there was only so much news, only so much to go out there. And the ability to disperse news was much lower than it is today, when a tweet can reach 1 million people easily. And that happens all the time. And so even more, really, millions of people. And so I think that looking for notoriety, looking for fame and all that goes with it, is something that our culture is so focused on. Instead of doing the ordinary things, just 150 years ago, everyone had to just go about their daily life pretty much knowing their family and friends and a few people in the town, right? It wasn't like you had 1,000 Facebook friends plus and you could kind of have all these big numbers. I think that there's a good distinction that I've heard someone make between being a good man and a great man. Like your Abraham Lincolns, your Julius Caesars, even your Adolf Hitlers and your Napoleon Bonapartes are great men in the sense that they affect history. Their names will go down forever in this grand way. They altered billions of people's lives with their actions. Whereas there's good men, and you can be a great man and a good man at the same time. It's hard, I think, very hard.
For sure.
But anyone can be a good man in the sense that you just make the right decisions, or good woman, that you make the right decisions on the day-to-day basis. You put God and your family first, and those sorts of things. And that's not heralded in our society. It's getting the cheap point, undermining your opponent. And I don't know, I think a huge part of why our discourse and our society is having trouble is it's lacking individuals who are just choosing to be good rather than choosing to undermine someone else or get the win or get getting something that's expedient, right? The 15 seconds of fame or whatever that comes with that.
The problem is that we've turned discourse into a popularity contest. Everyone's looking to cultivate their following, get a bunch of likes, and on top of that, no one's having these types of conversations, or very few people are having these types of conversations in person. It's very easy to be aggressive against other people when you're not going to look at them in the face. You're not going to be standing there with a bunch of people around you, like at a party, and you say something ridiculous and everyone's like, whoa, man, you're a jerk. Like, it's just, some people can do that online, but it's very easy to tune it out. Like, you don't have to worry about someone that's going to punch you in the face because you're a jerk to them if you just tweet something out, especially if they don't even know who you are. So I think that part of this the problem is we need to stop focusing on trying to puff ourselves up, seek the truth, but also make it more personal in the sense that we're actually connecting with other people and not just throwing our ideas out there into the void and only caring about the people who give us positive feedback.
I'm going to make a very wild connection, but it was a breakthrough I had recently between a video game that came out 2 years ago. Not that I'm advocating video games, but I played this a while back and it stuck with me. And the conversation that we had, that you also had, Nick, with Scott Yenner of Boise State University. So there's a game that came out 2 years ago called Death Stranding, and it's basically a FedEx simulator. But one of the aspects of the game is that you go out and you give people likes and you receive likes. And it's a post-apocalyptic game. And it never, like, I never understood when I was playing it why this almost Facebook aspect of it, because it's a single player game. It's a single player game. So it is in between the CPU and stuff. But there's a bit of lore that's in the game, which I found very interesting. That they talk about in this particular post-apocalyptic world, because everything sucks so much, people are more depressed. And the reason they instituted the like system is because it gives you oxytocin. And I'm like, oh my God, that makes so much sense, because that relates to the reason why we have this discourse. I mean, Nick, you were talking about how unfortunately, it's very easy to say something outlandish, to say something crazy, to say something that may not even be true, and to get that attention. And because it's biological that when we get likes, when we get that attention, when our tweets go viral or whatever, it makes us feel really good. It makes us feel loved, like we're just on a stage. We just gave a great speech. Going back to Adolf Hitler, probably what he felt like when everyone clapped, whether, for real or because they were told to clap. That does a lot to your endorphins. And it hit me after we had the conversation with Scott Yenner a couple of weeks ago, Brian, where he mentioned that you can't really bring back feminism, or you can't bring back family life unless you get rid of feminism. There's no real compromise. And I think for people that are struggling with discourse, I think that kind of logic holds true, that we need, if you're going to bring back maybe a more reasoned discourse, you need to truly cut out social media from your life, and you need to cut out any media that is going to try to sensationalize you and give you the ability to connect and engage with such sort of thing, something that prioritizes and that rewards these levels of discourse needs to be completely excised. It can't be bargained with. It can't be moderated. It needs to be completely gotten rid of. Otherwise, what's going to happen is we're still going to have these levels of discourse, even if they're only occasional, where things will just get to a heated point. And I think that that's very true. I think that in order for people to really reclaim individually or as a community any level of polite discourse in society, any real level of brotherhood, we need to take a step back from these big social media companies. And it's not even to say that we need to go on Gab or Parler or all these other places. Just social media, the idea in general is not designed to do anything but play with our brain chemistry, which is why Facebook and all these other companies love your data, which is another problem. But
Yeah, I like that point a lot. I mean, a huge part of, why our society is going for their 15 seconds of fame, why they're going for, the pleasures of porn or drugs, is because we really do have a lack of meaning that actually gives you the real happiness. And so we try to make up for that with pleasure, and we have a materialist view of ourselves, that we are a chemical set, that if you do XYZ, then it increases this brain chemical and I feel better, instead of saying I should live the way that I'm supposed to live. What is my nature? What is my essence? How should that play out in relation to the world? And I think that that's a huge thing. Another podcast that I've been listening to is the Pints with Jack podcast, and in talking about the Screw Tape Letters, I've read the book before, and I remember like a number of the pieces of advice that you get by kind of saying, oh, that's what the devil wants you to do, you should do the opposite, right? I feel like one of the biggest things that they've pointed out is that the devil wants you to think about doing things. You should be doing things instead. And that's where for me it's like, oh, I shouldn't just be like, oh, I pray for my wife to her soul to be better. It's like I should just be a good husband first and foremost. I should pray for her, yes, but I should be a good husband and I should take those actions. That's going to make that prayer come real. And so action and working towards something and having relationships as well, I think is a huge part of that. Those are a couple of things that I really learned um, that are really important that I think we kind of discount in our society, especially the taking action in a real way, not talking about things. We do a lot of posting on, your one vacation that you took last year for like the next 3 years, so it can look like you're always in Greece. And you're just a jet setter, but reality it was a 2-week vacation 3 years ago. Or we do a lot of this kind of superficial, even in your personal relationships, staying on that high level, or I don't know. I think it's a tough problem to unwrap in a lot of ways, but I think that finding a way for each of us to be taking certain actions to build relationships with people, to actually take action, like you said earlier, I think Stephen, you were talking about that, just being a man of action. I think that that's huge because you can have all the greatest intentions in the world, but if they never come to life because you never take action, then who cares? I mean, you really didn't do anything with that.
Yeah, we need to order our actions according to virtue, according to, what's good, what's true, what's beautiful. The problem today is that we've ordered our actions towards what we're passionate about, what our passions are telling us, what makes us feel good, what gives us pleasure. And there's nothing wrong with being passionate, with feeling good, having pleasure. The problem is you have to direct those things towards what is good. They have to be directed towards what is virtuous and not the other way around. And I think that's the real problem, is that if we only focus on tweeting out things that are going to get lots of likes, well, does that really matter if they're not true, if they're not good, if they're not going to help people? So and I think that just applies to everything that we do today. I almost feel like the social media and the internet has molded us so much that everyone is just going out there and doing things to like impress other people, and instead of ultimately doing things because it's good and because it's pleasing to God.
And I think the real question is obviously, well, what do you do? I think a lot of people are really down and out about the state of our society. And it could be for a lot of reasons, it could be because Biden's president and the world's ending, or, whatever it may be. There's a lot of reasons for people on really both sides of the aisle, politically or culturally, to feel bad about the state of things. And I think if you look at polls, however much you trust them, they kind of reflect that direction of the country is not going very well, and it hasn't, whether Trump or Biden or Obama's in office. And I think this gets back to the tragedy to commons, which I brought up at the end of my last comment, where a lot of people can look out at society and see that a lot of these things that they may not like, let's say if you're, much more traditional, you're a Catholic or a Christian, you may not like the over sexualization of culture, or you may not like, let's say casual dating. That's something you and I are talking about in our podcast right now, Brian, and the issues with that. Well, because it's so far out there, it's being pushed in every single aspect of society. You may just say, okay, well, if everyone else is doing it, then I might do it as well. And that's a real argument a lot of people have to deal with, especially young people. And it's not just about sex or relationships. There's a lot of realities that people struggle with that they have to, kind of contend with. And I would actually tie this into the whole GameStop and shorting stock thing. One of the things that's come out today, which I find hilarious, is that all of the major news companies last week, they tried to get people to sell GameStop, and they tried to make it seem like all of these companies like Melvin Capital were selling their shares, which they're not. They're filling their short orders, which they're not really able to because no one's selling their shares. Well, today their whole strategy was everyone on Reddit is saying you should buy silver or SLV, which is a fund, not actual silver. It's a fund that's based on silver, which is the fifth largest owner is Melvin Capital. So it's a way for them to try to recoup some losses. But no one on Reddit's actually saying that. So I think there's a real, thing to realize that if everyone is saying that you should do something or you should believe something, it may not always be the case. It may not be the way it is in reality. It may be people with an agenda on either side of the aisle again that want you to believe something. So that's where prudence comes in. And really, the last thing I would say is it's tough, but the people that do things that stand against the grain, those are the people that are the heroes in society. Who is it? Franz Jägerstätter, the Austrian Catholic who stood up to the Nazis as they, when they came into Austria. Those are the people that go against the grain when everyone else is saying you should do this that is against your conscience or against moral law or whatever it may be. Those are the people, these are the ways that we reclaim society. And we can't go about this with the intention or the idea that one tweet or one action or one connection even is going to change the fabric of America. But what we can go about is saying it can change and improve the connection I have with my neighbor or with my coworker and things like that. And even if it's just a little bit, that's better than not at all. And we can't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. We need to always be making progress and not just give up because it seems hopeless, it seems like we're outnumbered, or it seems like our efforts may be futile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the problem with the comments and with the culture is that the big problem with the comments is no one does anything about it because it's not their property, right? It's not their, if it's your house that's in disrepair, you'll fix it. If the lake that we all share is in disrepair, well, it's, I'm not dumping that much stuff in the lake. I mean, it's Jim over there is the one doing it all. That's the problem with the commons that happens. And I think that's what our culture is like, is it's, Jim and Steve both dumping crap in the lake and blaming the other person for it and not wanting to figure out a way to stop doing the bad stuff and polluting their culture, let's say, and then also finding ways to clean up the culture. And I think that's where I think it falls on each of us to say, okay, I'm going to make the choice to do the right thing, like you said, whether or not it's at a loss, whether or not it's the easy thing to do, because it's the right thing to do, A, and B, if enough people choose the right thing to do, then it will become the easier thing to do all of a sudden. If you have a virtuous populace, it's very easy to be a virtuous person. If you have a vicious populace, it's incredibly hard to be virtuous. And so you just have to rely on God for that, I think. And I think if you look at the early martyrs, I mean, the faith that they have that allows them to do all of that is tremendous. And they did that in the face of a very vicious culture. But the 150 years ago, I think it was much easier to be that virtuous person than it was 2,000 years ago because you were living in a culture that believed and taught what was right, or believed in rather, and taught what was right. And it's interesting. I was watching a show recently, Bridgerton, which has several unnecessary sex scenes and things like that that don't have to be there because it's modern culture, but for the most part do a very good job of capturing that sense that during the Victorian age of modesty, of chastity, of all of the sense of duty and honor that the men had. And like it was, I kind of was like, I don't know, this seems like it could be like a frou-frou, like I don't know, Hallmark type thing, but really the tension between the characters was really good of, you know, women having this stress of how do I find a husband because that's the only way I can be cared for in the society. It's either I find a husband or they lose their money because the estate goes to the sons, and so they have to find a husband to take care of them. And then the men having to stand up and take ownership of their lives, and the fact that there's a controversy of one man who vows something and has to uphold a vow to his father and a vow to his wife. How do you reconcile. And I thought that it was the problems that they're dealing with today. I mean, we just deal with such trivial problems. I think that our moral issues are just not even on the table. We wouldn't think twice about any of these things. We just say whatever feels good, do it. And I don't think a lot of people understand the tension that was really happening in this show, because I don't think we understand how people thought about morality and ethics at that time. It's crazy to me.
Good fiction is definitely a laboratory for virtue, and I think the example you just gave shows that even TV shows can have that same effect. I think there's many in a similar show, which would be Downton Abbey. I've not watched Bridgerton. It's honestly been a while since I've watched any TV series. Not to brag, but
What's your signal?
Yeah,
that's right. I don't watch TV, guys. But I think that's definitely true, and it's very good to view it like that, because a lot of people can view it as entertainment, but there is still a lot of good or decent culture out there, as well as in the past. Like, I can look over, and if I just look at any Dostoevsky, that is just a great fiction anyway to start to try to understand like virtuous characters and the tension you described, Nick. It's very important, I think, to have these sorts of things, especially in the fact that our culture is basically a secular post-Christian world. It was definitely easier, I would say, in 1000 AD in the middle of France to be virtuous, or maybe at the very least to appear virtuous. Obviously, we're not trying to sugarcoat the past, but nowadays there's really no sugarcoating. We live in a society that focuses on a lot of the wrong things, really looks like glorifying the passions, and really anything that you can do to clothe what you consume in terms that maybe make you think about these things, or at the very least point you towards virtue, or point you towards good living, point you towards heroic action or actual action, is good. A great example that I find hilarious. There was a show I watched maybe 3 years ago, and I think it was called The Tsar. It was Russian with English subtitles, but it was called Sophia. And it was about the last Byzantine princess who married basically the precursor to the Tsars in Russia, the father of Ivan the Terrible. And it was so fascinating because even though it was a Russian show that was in English, and it was only 6 or 7 episodes, it was really short miniseries. And it was a very good show, but it was just so interesting watching culture that had faith as such an important and not like demonized aspect. And for me, that meant a lot, because and it carried over into my everyday life in a sense, because I appreciated the show. I liked the writing. I liked what the message they were trying to say. And it also glorified many aspects of, our culture, virtuous living, virtuous kingship, that is, and Christianity, that's lacking. And I think those are just invaluable to encourage people to do the right thing, especially because, as we mentioned before, our culture is just so spiteful to a lot of people that may believe what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that to the extent that maybe it was easier to be virtuous in the past, I think it comes down a lot to discipline. I think that in the past they had a lot more disciplines that they had to keep. So, that part is difficult if you don't have those disciplines. Having good manners, being courteous, keeping certain social customs that so you don't offend people, things like that, where they're things that you grow up with, and you learn those things, as you're living in that society. And we've kind of thrown all those things away and said, oh, we want to be casual. Like, let's just be casual. Let's focus on convenience. And so to that extent, if we want to recover those things, it's going to take a lot more work on our part to have that discipline, especially when there's other people around us that don't. But I think it's certainly doable. And I think that you can't whitewash or maybe that's not the right word, but I think that it wasn't maybe as easy for them in the past because they had to keep all these disciplines. So it's easy to the extent that everyone else is doing it, but it still, takes the same amount of work for each individual to learn those things and to keep those disciplines. And so it's certainly doable, whether you lived 150 years ago or today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there was a societal pressure 150, even 60, 70 years ago to be a upright, moral person, to, at least, I would say at least 100 years ago, probably, to take part in, your faith and to be Christian in some sense. Whereas today, all the societal pressure is against that. All the societal pressure pushes you away from virtue. If you want to, not have sex before marriage, or to go to church, or I don't know, all sorts of different things that we would consider to be the right thing to do as Christians, you get derided for those things. If you want to stay away from drinking excessively and from porn, all of those things are like, well, why are you so uptight? That's what the society is pushing you into vice. Whereas I do think that there was a strong semblance of, there was a strong urging from the culture to do the right thing, and there was shame in all of the bad things that you would potentially do. Like if you would have to right the situation quickly. If you got someone pregnant, then you got married ASAP, and you dealt with that. Whereas now you just kind of, oh well, you can have baby mamas, you can choose to, there's all sorts of vicious ways of going about it. You can just ditch the mom, you can get an abortion, you can do all these terrible things that are not the right thing to do to right the wrong when you do have that. And
Maybe we need to make shame great again.
Massa.
This is something, and now that we have a Biden presidency, my ire against this sort of thing has come about. But there's a lot of people, I think the Daily Wire, most of them are masters of it, and there's a lot of other sites that are like this, that now that they're an opposition group to the presidency and to Congress and stuff, they'll write these faux outrage articles, and they may be actually outraged, but outrage sells. And this gets back to exactly what we were talking about before. Outrage, clickbait headlines sell. They get clicks, they get ad revenue, they get people to subscribe, they get people to perpetuate the cycle of outrage by sharing on Facebook. And these are, the top 10 pages on Facebook. And I'm not saying they shouldn't raise complaints. I mean, obviously complaining is bad. You should, if you're going to talk about something like this, present opposite solutions and not just be woe is me or lamenting the days of old or whatever. And that's really an issue with a lot of these things, is that we really do need to bring back shame. I agree with that, Brian, wholeheartedly. I think we need to make shame great again. Not saying we just pick fights on Twitter with people. I've done that enough in the past. Unfortunately, I could say that's bad for me spiritually as much as ineffectual it is. But we need to realize that, we need to realize that it looks maybe a little different than maybe some like big publications may try to make it out to be. And then if we really do want to try to bring back culture, it's not just about being upset about something, because being upset and feeling bad or feeling outraged, morally superior or so, like even if you're correct, doesn't mean you're going to do anything. And it's just bad for your mental health to just read all this outrage and not take any action, because you're just building all this pent up stuff, and you're just beginning to hate people. You're beginning to become more cynical. I mean, it really is truly a cycle. So really, the other thing I would say is, if we want to try to make civil discourse great again, if we want to make our nation great again, we need to make sure that we couch any disagreements we may have with people. We can shame them and we can say what they're doing is wrong, but we also need to make sure we are presenting them with an alternative. And we need to just not laugh at them and point and laugh at them, because for the most part, in 99% of the cases, I think in some cases that's really all you can do. In some cases, honestly, they're really at a loss. And I hate to say that, but there are people that seek correction in basically a paternal sense. And if you're offered to them, especially because they've been missing it, there are some people that will be willing to pick it up. So making sure that we can get that proper balance is very important to me in how we interact, like as a project, but also individually, with our, society, and with like the people that are in our sphere on social media, and just, with the podcast and stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that two things you could do to help people in conversations is seek to understand them and what they're trying to tell you, and don't try to undermine them, but put forth your vision. And I think that seeking to understand and putting forth a vision, an alternative. I was listening to Jordan Peterson interview earlier, and that was one of the things that he pointed out is it's not about showing why someone else is wrong. It's about showing why you're more right, because
Mhm.
everyone is right in some respect. A lot of like all of the criticisms, even of socialists, of people who atheists, people who I vehemently disagree with, they have good points that they raise. And so it's not about undermining their worldview. It's about building up and presenting my own in a steel man sort of way, and trying to understand why they may have that different opinion instead of undermining their opinion with everything that I say and do, which is what we generally do in our society today.
Very much so. It's hard. We were raised like that, I think, in many ways, and we grew up in a culture like that, where the impulses, at least for me, I'll speak for me. I won't speak for you, Brian. The impulses are there to go ad hominem, go, a lot of these routes that are less than helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember when I first started this was connecting with people on the internet. This was before social media. Like I think maybe MySpace was starting to get big, but I would go on these forums and people would be talking about things, and I would just share my opinion. And I realized, this is a different type of conversation. The first time someone just like tore me apart because I didn't like cover all of my bases on what I was trying to say. And I think that's part of the problem that's just grown to everyone today, where no one wants to try to understand the other person. They just want to find a hole so they can poke at it and rip it open. And I think if we want to have more civil discourse, if we want to understand and get to the truth and help other people see the truth, and for us to see the truth, we can't just look for ways to rip people apart. We need to find what are they saying that's true, and if they're saying that something that's not true, then how can I help them to see that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an act of charity to lead someone to the truth. In all reality, it's not something that should be, although it feels it's tough. I mean, when you're corrected, it sucks.
Yeah.
Whenever someone is like, you're wrong about that, it's not a fun thing to go through, but I think that it's definitely something that is good to show somebody, especially if you do it in a way that's not, uh, well, abrasive or being a jerk about it, doing it out of charity, doing it in a way that's caring for them and trying to lead them to truth, not trying to be right or impose your belief on them. I think that it comes off a lot better at that point.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing that would be a lot of fun, maybe to wrap up here, is if you had uh, something that you could kind of wave a magic wand and say, this is something I would fix in our society right now.
Mm.
I'm curious what the
Oh,
one
man.
top thing would be, because we talked a lot about different aspects of things where we can do better, things where our culture is suffering, where it could, potential solutions. But what's one thing that would maybe, magic wand and that goes away? What would that be? Or magic wand and something appears even too, I kind of, that's obviously the pessimist in me, showing that like I'm looking more for getting rid of things in our culture than building
Yeah,
things. But
via negativa. You want to go first, Brian? I got
Yeah, I got one. I would say I would wave a magic wand and families would move back to one another. I think we have people that just they grow up and they say, well, I'm moving out and I'm leaving my family, and maybe we'll live an hour away, maybe we'll live several states away. I think that that's tragic. I think that that's a shame. And I mean, that really tears apart communities, because if you have families that and other families that with your family, that helps to build the community up. And I've been dating this girl, and she's from Croatia, and she was telling me about how when they live, the houses that they have, this is her family, and I assume that it's lots of families based on the way she's described it, is that they actually like live in a big house, and her parents live there, her cousins live there, her grandparents live there, and like they all live together so that they all can be with one another and take care of one another. The younger people can take care of the old people, the older people can take care of the children. And it's a great way to grow close to your family. And they even know their neighbors and their families as well. So I think that I just remember back to my mom talking about when she was growing up. And I guess back then there was like you had your Italian neighborhood and your Irish neighborhood, and she knew all of the neighbors, and like they knew the neighbor kids, and the neighbor parents knew each other. And I don't know. I don't know how you would get back to that point, but I think that we need to get away from this wanderlust that we have as a society, and we need to plant roots somewhere and stick to it. And maybe that means we live in a place that isn't as exotic or as exciting as we might want to. Maybe we live in a small town where we're from and we know everyone. Like, I think that that's it's if we know the people we live with, we're a lot more likely to get along with them, and we can certainly get to know people if we move there. But yeah, I guess we could have a whole episode on that, but that's what I would do.
Yeah. I mean, Brian, my utopia is planes as far as you can go, just fly over country. No one bothers me. This is tough. There's a part of me that wants to take the Hoppa pill and go some of that down that route politically, or as relates to politics. But I think I'll refrain from that because that requires a big explanation. I would say the biggest thing that I would change would be if not elimination, the very great reduction of public education, both universities and in terms of K through 12, to the point where that would mean that homeschooling and private schools pick up most of the burden. Obviously, that necessitates a little bit of other things in society. So I'm kind of cheating a little bit by saying that homeschooling would become bigger. But I think that's a great step. And then when it comes to the university system, I think changing the ways, this would basically mean that we change the ways that people go to college, both in terms of the length. I was an accountant. I didn't need 3 years of the stuff that I learned because it was just not accounting. Either. Right. I don't need the humanities. I understand why it made sense in the past, but if you're going to use the current education model, just cut it down and be as efficient as possible. And I would also say that we need to streamline the university systems. As an accountant, I didn't need a 4-year degree. That's just the way it is. If you're an engineer or an architect, definitely. I want to drive on a bridge that was written by that was designed and created by someone that has the highest level of skill. If you're a lawyer or a doctor, 100%.
I would argue engineer does not need that. I think that apprenticeship would be better.
Mm-hmm. I don't think, yeah. I like my engineer to take calculus. I don't know if he needs to take sociology.
That's exactly the thing, and really we could eliminate all of these liberal arts degrees. And now, to be fair, I mean, we could still have private universities like Hillsdale College is a great example that cater to the, I'll say, kind of more classical education model. But realistically, my magic wand would be that every single person already gets that. Maybe it's to the extent that like Susan Wise Bauer would like or not in K through 12, and they begin to understand a lot of the tritium and the quadrivium. So I'll stick with that. It's a little easier to explain and sum up.
Every American knew Latin.
Yes. Oh, I should have just said that.
Awesome. Well, that was a lot of fun. I think
Yeah.
mine's an easy one. I'd just get rid of abortion. That would be my magic wand.
I like that.
That would be good.
I think that would solve a lot of problems.
Mhm.
But well, at least it would solve,
Get rid of the worship of balls.
hundreds of-
Yes.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. But
That
anyways,
would help with the family too.
I think so.
I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and a lot more kids to educate via homeschool then too.
Yeah.
I like it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it, guys. And
Absolutely.
where can people find out more about the Vital Masculinity Podcast if they're looking?
Sure. So we obviously have a podcast. We also got a website, vitalmasculinity.org. We have a journal there with 100 plus articles now. We started a couple of months ago. All of our podcast stuff is there. You can also find us wherever you listen to podcasts. We are on Twitter at, and I hope I got this right, we're at the VM Pod, VVM, letters VM Pod. We're also on Gab at Vital Masculinity. We're on Facebook at Vital Masculinity page. We really need to consolidate some of these. And we also just launched a Patreon which is patreon.com/Vital Masculinity, where we have some exclusive content. We're going to do a locals. We do have a local still, but we can't exactly get that set up yet because we're not a legal entity, which is hard with 2 people right now. So
I see. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I'll talk to you guys soon.
yeah,
Thank you.
thanks for the conversation,
Good
Nick.
time.
Man, I really enjoyed that interview. And I know that, all right, at least I hope that you did as well. I think that Brian and Stephen just are very insightful, especially when we start talking about virtue. Those guys have it down pat. I mean, obviously, we're all working to get better, but when it comes to discussing the virtues, they're fantastic. So I really enjoyed it. I gleaned a lot of information, and we'll be going back and listening again. And hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you want to support the Conversation for Our Generation, head out over to the conversationforourgeneration.com to find out more. If you want to support me, buy my book, Property Rights in the Digital Age, on Amazon. That will help me out. And you can also even just go to locals. Had trouble thinking of it for a second. conversationforourgeneration.locals.com, and you can become a member there for just $2 a month. Right now, you can get your first month free if you do start 2020, the coupon code, and that way you can just support me. $2 a month. I mean, it's 8 episodes or so, 8 to 10 episodes, depending on how many weeks there are in the month and how the days fall. But that, all of that, the extra content that I'm doing and all of that stuff, just takes time, takes effort. And so if you want to support that, you can do that. And I'm also rolling out the Discord server. So trying to build more of a community as well, where we can have good discussions instead of just talking about how to do it. How do I help facilitate that more? And that's what I'm looking to do. So definitely be on the lookout for announcements about Discord. Subscribe on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts. Leave a good rating, share this with your friends, and thank you for listening to this episode of The Conversation of Our Generation. Let's get the dialogue going. I'll talk to you next time.